Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the true crime series about everyday life. If the previous episodes made us shiver because of deceitful love, today I invite you to step onto a small boat. Yes, that's right, a tiny aluminum boat, so simple that when you look at it, you immediately think, oh, probably just for a weekend fishing trip. But it was this seemingly harmless boat that became the focus of a murder case that shocked America. Imagine, Laci Peterson's body was found floating in San Francisco Bay. The prosecutor asserted Scott, the cold-blooded husband, used this small boat to carry his wife's body, 8 months pregnant, out to sea and dispose of it. It sounds reasonable, but then the defense attorney stood up, pointed at the boat, and asked. He alone, with this tiny boat, could carry an 8-month pregnant body out to sea without anyone discovering it? Or could the boat even capsized right at the dock? The whole courtroom exploded. That was the new climax of the case. The boat, a small piece of evidence, but enough to overturn the death sentence. TV programs immediately conducted tests, loading sandbags into the boat to see if it would capsize. The press ran a sensational headline, "The boat that holds the truth." The American people were excitedly discussing, "This boat is the most terrifying silent witness." And that is why we are here today, to dissect together, is the boat solid evidence or just a precarious piece in the whole case? In Part 4, we will not only review the arguments of the prosecutor and the lawyer, but also follow the scientific experiments, the conflicting hypotheses, and the truth that sometimes a person's fate depends on the balance of a fishing boat. In any murder case, there's always a piece of evidence that is considered the key, a small thing that carries the weight of the entire verdict. In the case of Laci Peterson, that piece of evidence was not a knife, not a gun, not even a bloodstain on the carpet. It was an aluminum fishing boat, just over 4 meters long, so simple that if you saw it on the dock, you would immediately think, oh, maybe some uncles go fishing on the river on the weekend. But in the eyes of the prosecutor, that was the tool of murder and destruction. The story began when the police followed Scott Peterson's statement. He said that on the morning of December 24th, while his wife was at home walking the dog, he drove to Berkeley Marina to go fishing. It sounded reasonable, but the problem was, when Laci disappeared, no one believed that going fishing on Christmas morning was normal. The police went to the dock, investigated, and discovered that Scott had an aluminum boat hidden in the warehouse. The boat became the focus. The prosecution immediately built a scenario. Scott killed Laci at home, put the body in the car, drove it to the dock, then took a boat out to San Francisco Bay and dumped it in the water. Laci's body washed up on shore a few months later, exactly where Scott said he went fishing. It was a perfect scenario for an indictment. But the problem arose. Was the small boat strong enough to carry the body without capsizing? And could Scott do it all by himself without anyone noticing? That was where the controversy came from. The prosecution laid out the story. Scott bought the boat a few weeks before Laci disappeared, secretly, without telling anyone. He made cement weights, which were supposed to be used to tie the body down. This was a sign of premeditation. When the body was found, there was no trace of rope, but the prosecution argued that the cement blocks were the key to turning the boat into a tool for disposal. In court, the prosecutor held up a photo of the boat, held it high, and declared, "This is a silent murder weapon." The audience was in an uproar. People watching TV nodded. That's right, the boat is evidence. But the defense attorneys were not so easily defeated. They counterattacked. With such a small boat, how could a man take the body of an 8-month pregnant woman out to sea without it capsizing? If he really could do it, he must be a superhero. The entire courtroom burst into laughter because the image of a man struggling on a rocking boat in the middle of a bay with big waves was a bit like a comedy scene. And from then on, the boat became the center of controversy, not only in court, but also on television, in newspapers, in cafes, and even at dinner parties. People talked about it like they talked about the weather. Hey, do you think the boat will capsize? It was strange that a normal fishing tool became a star in the newspaper. TV channels immediately seized the opportunity. They made special programs, recreating the scene with a model boat. They loaded the boat with sandbags, testing to see if it would capsize. Some tests showed that the boat still floated, but was dangerously unstable. Others concluded that if they moved it too hard, it would capsize. The mixed results made the public even more curious. The press headlined, "Is the boat lying or telling the truth?" People were divided. Those who believed the prosecution said, "It's too obvious. The boat was the murder weapon." Those who believed the defense said, "It's impossible to dispose of evidence by boat." Regardless of which side you're on, everyone agrees on one thing. The boat has become a symbol of the case. But why does the boat carry so much weight? Because it's the only link connecting Scott to the scene in San Francisco Bay where the body was found. Without the boat, the fishing story would have been just another casual outing. But with the boat and the body washing up in that area, the narrative immediately changes. He didn't go fishing. He wanted to get rid of the body. The prosecution knew this, so they put all their effort into the boat. They displayed it in court as a silent witness. The defense tried to do the opposite, turning it into a joke. A man carries a body, ties it with cement, and rows it out to sea without anyone seeing it? You think this is an action movie? That argument struck a chord with many people, because indeed, imagining Scott sneaking around like a ninja in broad daylight sounds a bit absurd. But the prosecutor responded, "Murderers are often reckless, and he was very calculating. No one expected it, and that's why he almost succeeded." The media blew it up. They invited maritime experts, physicists, and even rowing coaches to analyze it. One program even recreated Scott rowing on the lake, using a doll as a body. Viewers at home were both horrified and amused. Someone joked, "Guinness must have recorded this case in the books. The most talked about boat in the world." But behind those funny arguments was a harsh truth. Scott's fate, the fate of the death sentence, depended on that little boat. If the boat could do what the prosecutor said, Scott was guilty. If not, the whole scenario was shaky. And that's why Evidence in the Boat became the title of the entire documentary. We see clearly, this boat is not only evidence, but also a symbol of the whole case. It is both fragile and precarious, like the truth floating in the waves of controversy. And in the following chapters, we will witness many more mind games surrounding it. Scientific testing, legal arguments, and even the power of the media to turn it into the main character. If you thought science was all about test tubes, microscopes, and white labs, the Laci Peterson case will show you another side. Science can also take place right on an old boat in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Since the prosecutors proposed the hypothesis that Scott used the boat to dispose of Laci's body, debates have erupted everywhere. Could that boat really do that? And so, a series of reconstruction experiments were born, both serious and sometimes like a variety show on television. The prosecutors took the lead. They sought out marine experts and physical engineers to verify. Some experts concluded that maybe if Scott tied the body with cement blocks, distributed the weight reasonably, then it would not be impossible to take it out to the bay and drop it. They presented diagrams, buoyancy charts, and meticulous calculations as if they were lecturing engineering students. Meanwhile, the defense attorney retorted, "It's easy to talk, but try it and see if it capsizes." And so the test began. One of the most famous experiments involved a team of experts using the same aluminum boat Scott owned, loading it with sandbags weighing the same as Laci's pregnancy. They rowed out into the lake, trying to recreate the act of tying the weight and dropping it. The result? The boat rocked violently, almost capsized several times. Once, the sandbag fell into the water, splashing water everywhere, making the whole crew laugh in both fear and amusement, as if they were watching a comedy show. The press immediately ran the headline, "Boat capsizes, theory of disposal shaken." The public was divided, some believing, some skeptical. At that moment, a national television channel intervened, turning the experiment into a live television show. They called it Boat Test. The audience sat in front of the TV, eating popcorn, watching people row the boat, dropping sandbags, and commenting animatedly like watching football. Someone shouted, "See, it capsized." Another objected, "Yeah, but not sure, maybe Scott is more skillful." It was true that there was less tragedy, more entertainment. The prosecutors still stuck to the argument. Scott didn't need to maintain perfect balance, just enough to get out to sea and dispose of the body. Even if the boat was rocking, as long as the body sank, the goal was achieved. They emphasized that the boat almost capsized, not meaning it was impossible, only dangerous. And the lawyer took advantage of the chaos to sow doubt. You see, the boat is like a juggling game. A small deviation and it will be overturned. How could a normal person do it in the middle of a bay with big waves and strong winds? That argument sounded reasonable, at least in the eyes of the public. And so, that small boat became a stage for both sides to show off their tricks. In court, the prosecutor brought pictures of the boat, clips of experiments, and expert testimony. The lawyers brought up the failed experiment results, showing the image of the boat almost capsized to prove that the prosecutor was just telling a fairy tale. The jury sat listening, leaning to one side, swaying to the other, just like the boat in the argument. As for the media, needless to say, they exploited it thoroughly. Each experiment was filmed, broadcast, and analyzed in detail. Some channels even hired actors to play Scott, rowing a boat in the middle of the lake to increase the drama. Americans sat at home, shuddering and laughing. If this isn't called a reality TV show, then what is it? And in those shows, the phrase, "evidence in the boat," appeared frequently, becoming the hottest headline. But more importantly, these experiments did not yield definite conclusions. Some experiments were successful, some failed. Some experts said it was possible, some said it wasn't. It was all just a hypothesis. And it was that ambiguity that created a strange attraction. The public was drawn in, talking for months, like watching a chess match whose outcome no one knew. Meanwhile, Scott in prison was still following the news, and his legal team clung to every detail to prepare for an appeal. They knew that if they could prove that the discarded boat scenario was not feasible, the entire verdict could be shaken. And indeed, later, in the appeals, the boat was repeatedly mentioned as the weakest but most important piece of evidence. We could see clearly. The boat had left the harbor of truth, plunging into the whirlpool of scientific controversy, where every wave was an opinion, every gust of wind was an article, and the whole society sat on the shore watching, both nervous and amused. And in the following chapters, the battle on this boat would be even more fierce, as both the prosecution and the defense used all their cards to prove or deny its power. There are trials that become iconic, not only because the crime is so horrifying, but also because some small detail suddenly takes over the airwaves, becoming the center of attention for the whole world. In the case of Laci Peterson, the trial revolved not only around a husband accused of killing his pregnant wife, but also around a boat. Yes, a small, rusty aluminum boat, which was only used for weekend fishing, but was now placed solemnly in the middle of the courthouse like a treasure. The first day the boat was brought into the courthouse, the auditorium exploded. The press jostled to take pictures, and live television cameras panned without missing a single angle. People described it as a silent witness, as an anonymous weapon. Some journalists even joked, "Never in history has a small boat enjoyed such a spotlight." This, ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor began, his voice firm, is the instrument Scott Peterson used to dispose of the bodies of his wife and unborn child. This is not just a fishing vessel. It is a murder vessel. They held up a picture of the boat, combined with a diagram and video of Scott towing it, creating a seamless scenario. Kill Laci at home, transport the body to the dock, take a boat out to the bay, tie it with cement blocks, and dump it. In the prosecutor's eyes, the boat was more than evidence. It was Scott's only link to the crime scene. Without the boat, there was no way to explain how Laci's body had floated back from the water where Scott said he had gone fishing. The jury listened intently, as if they were being told a horror story with props. But then, it was the defense's turn. They approached the boat, rapped on it, turned to the jury and smiled. "You see how small it is. Just imagine a man alone carrying the body of an 8-month pregnant woman, placing it here, balancing it, rowing out to sea, tying it with cement, and dropping the body, all without anyone seeing it, without the boat capsizing. Doesn't that sound like a B-grade action movie?" The whole courtroom burst into laughter. And that was the goal, to turn the prosecution's scenario into a farce. They showed pictures of the boat almost capsized and clips of sandbags falling into the water in the press to prove that this impossible mission could not happen. They also called witnesses who were maritime experts, who asserted that disposing of the body like that is harder than climbing a mountain in flip-flops. The prosecution immediately countered. They invited physicists, engineers, and people who analyzed buoyancy and Archimedes' thrust, and calculated that with the weight distributed properly, the boat could maintain its balance long enough to complete the disposal. They also pointed out that Scott was an avid fisherman and familiar with boats, so it was entirely possible that he could control them better than the average person. And so, the trial turned into a physics class combined with a TV show. One side presented formulas and force diagrams. The other side released a video of a boat overturning experiment. The entire jury sat listening, their minds spinning as if they were taking an exam. The outside media described the trial as a soccer match. The prosecutor scored with a boat diagram. The defense equalized with a boat overturning video. The public watched every day, talking excitedly. Which team won today? As if they were watching a long Netflix series. But amid these arguments, one thing was clear. The small boat had become the center. Every testimony, every piece of evidence revolved around it. Some jurors even confessed later that what they remembered most about the trial was not the image of Scott being cold, but the image of the boat lying in the middle of the court, silent but heavy. And it was that silence that created space for each side to cram their own stories. The prosecution stuffed it with a gruesome scenario of disposing of the body. The defense stuffed it with comical absurdity. The public stuffed it with endless arguments. As for the truth, it was still floating like a boat in the waves. To increase the drama, one day the prosecution took the jury to the field to see the boat with their own eyes, to touch it, to feel its smallness. They wanted to create a strong impression. Scott used the very thing you are looking at to kill someone. On the contrary, the defense invited them to watch the experiments, to laugh out loud at the scene of the boat rocking. Both sides understood. Whoever controlled the image of the boat in the jury's mind had the advantage. Even outside the court, the ship was recreated as a model in television shows. The comedian used it to satirize. The ship is more famous than the Titanic, except that the Titanic really sank, while this ship is sinking in controversy. The audience laughed, but did not forget that behind that laughter was the fate of a person and justice for a pregnant woman who died unjustly. We see clearly, the court is not only a place to try Scott, but also a place to try the ship. It was dragged out to be dissected, turned into a weapon, into a farce, into a symbol. And the jury, as well as the public, were pulled back and forth, rocking like the ship. In a society where television is broadcast in every home and newspapers are available at every newsstand, it is not unusual for a major case to become a national spectacle. But the Laci Peterson case was far more salient than the O.J. Simpson or JonBenet Ramsey cases in one respect. It featured a small boat, and it quickly became a media icon. If you turned on a TV in the United States that year, or flipped through a few news channels, you would have seen the image of the aluminum boat glistening under the courtroom lights, or the video of the boat nearly capsized on a lake. The press gave it all sorts of nicknames: the boat of fate, the floating weapon, the silent witness. Some tabloids even ran headlines like, "Talking Boat will report Scott." Despite the absurdity, readers read it anyway. And the more they read, the more fascinated they became. In the evening talk shows, the MC joked, "Today we are not talking about the election, not about the economy, but about a tiny boat. It is so small that if you put it in the yard, the neighbors will think you have a dog with a mobile home. But it is the thing that decides whether you have a death sentence or not." The audience laughed out loud, but still kept their eyes glued to the screen because the story was so attractive. The TV channels competed fiercely. Everyone wanted to have exclusive rights to the images and detailed analysis. Some channels hired maritime experts to come on air, bring a boat model, and explain like a math teacher, "This is buoyancy, this is gravity, this is how to tie a heavy object." Viewers shook their heads and exclaimed, am bad at physics, but now it sounds like I'm watching an educational cartoon. Meanwhile, entertainment programs used boats to satirize. Some shows even staged a skit, with the actor playing Scott struggling with sandbags, the boat rocking, and the background music playing "Row, Row, Row Your Boat." The audience laughed and shuddered. What a tragic farce. On the online newspaper, which was still in its infancy at the time, the discussion forum was heated. Some believed Scott was guilty, citing the boat as ironclad evidence. Those who defended him mocked. It would be easier to put the whole circus troupe on the boat than to dispose of the body. That division made the case a hot topic. Everyone had an opinion, from housewives to taxi drivers. Reporters wrote diligently, even recreating the scene of Scott pulling the boat to the dock in a 3D simulation running on the evening news. Viewers sat down to dinner and commented as if they were watching the World Cup. A notable detail was the coverage was so great that it affected the jury. Although they were asked to stay away from the media, the atmosphere in society made it difficult for them to avoid it. Some analysts said that the image of the boat constantly appearing had become ingrained in the mind, unintentionally creating prejudice. It was no longer just evidence. It became a symbol of crime. And in some big cases, when evidence becomes a symbol, it has more power than the truth. The media continues to exaggerate the story. They organize special programs called Secrets of the Boat Test Revisited. The MCs dress up as sailors, stand next to a boat model, comment seriously as if discussing nuclear weapons. Viewers laugh, but then are convinced that the boat is really important. Many people even drive to the marina where Scott visited, take check-in photos, post them online, here where history happened. The boat becomes a dark tourist spot, attracting people just to see the disposal scene. On the other hand, the defense lawyers are visibly upset. They accuse the press of turning the case into a circus, putting heavy pressure on them. But they themselves take advantage of it, participate in talk shows, argue on air, and turn themselves into heroes in front of the public. The prosecutors were no pushovers either, emphasizing in every interview, the boat is irrefutable evidence. And so, both sides, despite their criticism of the media, still relied on it to fuel their arguments. And the public benefited. They had drama to talk about every day. In the evenings, millions of American families sat around the TV, eating and arguing. He could have done it with the boat. No, the boat would definitely capsize. As the journalist wrote, the American dining table has turned into a secondary courtroom. The strange thing is, the more people argued, the more the truth became blurred. The boat became the star, while Laci, the real victim, was often overshadowed. Some people spoke up. We forgot that this was a murder case, not a boat testing game show. But that voice was small, swallowed up by the noisy news flow. We clearly saw the power of the media. An ordinary boat, through the lens of the press, becomes a national symbol, decides public opinion, influences the jury, and inflates the whole case. And in that world, throughout the long journey of the case, from the day Laci Peterson went missing, to when her body drifted into San Francisco Bay, to when Scott was arrested, the boat always appeared like a haunting shadow. It was not only evidence, not only a prosecutorial prop or a joke for the defense, but also a mirror reflecting American society, a society both thirsty for justice and addicted to media drama. To understand its weight in the trial, we must look back at how both sides turned the boat into a strategic weapon. For the prosecution, the boat was a bridge, the only path leading from Scott's house to Laci's body. Without the boat, they could not have created a scenario of disposing of the body. With the boat, they had a seamless story, from murder to hiding the body. And the prosecution played that card to the end, turning the boat into a weapon, a witness, a symbol. As for the defense, they chose to make the boat a farce, an absurdity that caused the prosecution's scenario to collapse. They brought in experiments, experts, rocking clips, all to plant a question in the jury's mind. Could he really do it? And in the law, a big enough question mark, a reasonable doubt, can save a defendant's life. But as the case drew to a close, both the prosecution and the defense realized the truth. The boat had gotten out of their control. It was no longer a talking point, but a media star debated by millions of Americans every day. Television, newspapers, talk shows turned it into a phenomenon, and that phenomenon returned to the court, weighing heavily on the jury. In the minds of many, Scott was associated with the boat was associated with the corpse, and so his guilt was automatically associated with it. Justice, for a moment, was no longer based solely on scientific evidence, but on collective impressions. And that impression was occupied by the boat. When the jury retired to the jury room, the atmosphere was said to be tense. They discussed for hours, arguing over every detail, and the boat was mentioned again and again. Someone said, "I'm not sure Scott could do it." Another replied, "But why did he lie? Why did the body float back to where he was fishing?" Questions piled on questions, but the boat was always in the middle. Public opinion outside was also heated. The press updated every minute. Netizens, at that time forums, blogs, wrote thousands of lines betting on whether Scott would be convicted or acquitted. People joked, "This is a national game show. The prize is a person's life." But in that laughter was the cruel truth. The death sentence or not depends on the belief in a boat. When the final verdict was announced, Scott Peterson was sentenced to death. The whole of America exploded. One side applauded and cheered. "Justice for Laci." The other side exclaimed, "No, it was an injustice, just relying on a rocking boat to kill a person." The press headlined, "The verdict shocked America." Talk shows opened the topic. Did Scott deserve to die, or was he a victim of the media? At the dinner table, in the cafe, on the radio, people were talking everywhere. And the boat, once again, was present in every story. It was not only a prop of the trial, it became a symbol of the whole case. It proved the strange power of evidence when inflated by the media. It showed that justice could be shaped not only by evidence, but by public sentiment. And it left a burning question. Did Scott really commit the crime, or was he convicted by a boat? That is why this case is forever controversial. People write books, make documentaries, and debate for decades, but every time it is mentioned, the first image that pops up is still the boat. At this point, we can affirm, the boat has become the main character, on par with Scott and Laci. It did not say a word, but it decided the fate of a person. And on a social level, it exposed the hard-to-swallow truth. We, the public, often prefer to believe in strong images rather than vague truths. Episode 4 ended, leaving us with a feeling of suffocation. A small boat, from a fishing tool, turned into a symbolic weapon, then into a scale of justice. Scott was sentenced to death, but the question of truth still hung in the air, like the boat rocking endlessly. And this is also the time we move on to a new chapter where the door of justice closed with a bang that shook the whole of America. If you think the story has stopped here, you are very wrong, because the next part is the climax of all the drama, the final verdict, the shock that deeply divided America. In Part 5, Laci Peterson Verdict, the trial that shocked America true crime documentary, we will witness together how the jury made the life or death decision, the public backlash, and why the verdict is still controversial to this day. Backhand index pointing right, don't take your eyes off, because Part 5 is the finale that cannot be missed.